So first of all, the University of Minnesota Spotlight Series is a collaborative partnership between Northrop, the Institute for Advanced Study, and the University Honors Program to present lectures, panel discussions, exhibits, and other events throughout the academic year around a topic of timely interest. The 2019-20 series focuses on environmental justice and features perspectives from a variety of voices in the field, including academics and practitioners from multiple disciplines. Campus leaders, artists, policymakers, and funders will explore several critical aspects surrounding the intersection of the environment and equity. The University of Minnesota Twin Cities is located on traditional, ancestral, and contemporary lands of indigenous peoples. The university resides on Dakota land ceded in the treaties of 1837 and 1851. The Institute for Advanced Studies acknowledges this place has a complex and layered history. This land acknowledgement is one of the ways in which we work to educate the campus and community about this land and our relationships with it and each other. The Institute for Advanced Studies is committed to ongoing efforts to recognize, support, and advocate for American Indian nations and peoples. There are a couple upcoming events we'd like to invite you to. The first is next Thursday, a week from today. It's a conversation on university history. And IAS Thursday's next event, Therapy Apps and Virtual Nurses of Meaning Machines and the Future of Connective Labor, which will be here, not here, down one floor, two floors, 240 in this building, same time though, 3:30 p.m. Finally, it is my pleasure to welcome our two speakers, Aviva Romani and Katherine Milan, and our moderator for today, Keesha Everett. Aviva Romani, who's seated in the center of our trio here, began her career as a performance artist, founding and directing the American Ritual Theater, performing throughout California. She graduated from the California Institute of the Arts and received a PhD from Plymouth University in the UK. Romani has presented workshops on her theoretical approach to environmental restoration, and her transdisciplinary work has been exhibited internationally, including in the Independent Museum of Contemporary Art, Cyprus, with the National Centers of Contemporary Art, Ekaterinburg and Moscow, Russian Federation, Keirik, Daejeon, Korea, and the Hudson River Museum in Yonkers, New York, the Contemporary Arts Center in Cincinnati, Ohio, and the Boulder Museum of Contemporary Art in Boulder, Colorado. Her work has been discussed and covered in books, essays, and in art magazines such as Art in America, Art News, The Huffington Post, and Leonardo. Romani's video documentation Gulf to Gulf sessions have been viewed online from over 85 countries. Trigger Points, Tipping Points, a precursor to Gulf, premiered at the 2007 Venice Biennial. In 2002, her pioneering community action project Blue Rocks helped restore degraded wetlands on Vinyl Haven Island in Maine, a USDA investment of over $500,000. The Blue Trees Symphony project has received numerous awards and been extensively written about and exhibited internationally. Katherine Milan, who's on my far right, Dr. Katherine Milan is a community-engaged scholar, writer, energy democracy advocate, and community solar activist whose work has long been rooted in the emerging field of investigation into governance models for common property, commons, gifts of nature, air, water, wildlife, food, and community that are governed for the common good through tools of public trust and community trust law. She founded and directs the Solar Commons Research Project, which innovates and prototypes community trust ownership of solar energy for low-income communities. As a research social scientist based in the anthropology program at the University of Minnesota Duluth, she teaches courses on the anthropology of energy, the new commons, the anthropology of law and social theory, and interacts with faculty and students engaged in research on ecological and social justice. She's a former fellow of the Tamales Bay Institute and On the Commons, which focus on commons strategy building. Currently, she is a fellow at the Institute on the Environment and an affiliated faculty member of the University of Minnesota Law School. For her work on the Solar Commons Project, Milan has been honored with a U.S. Green Building Council Legacy Project Award. Dr. Milan has published 2 academic books, Pathologies of Modern Space, 2006, Routledge, A Cultural History of the Modern Urban Commons, and The Political Uncommons, The Cross-Cultural Logic of the Global Commons, 2011, Routledge. a study of the global commons in international law and the legal challenges presented by indigenous communities. Her current book manuscript on the Solar Commons Project is for a general audience. It is a work of public anthropology based on her community-engaged legal scholarship, designing and prototyping community trust solar ownership for low-income communities in the US. Dr. Milan collaborates with public artists to create more accessible ways of presenting complex legal and technical issues involving renewable energy, common property ownership, climate change mitigation, social equity, and community empowerment. Students from Dr. Milan's Energy Culture Society course run the annual Duluth Power Dialogue, a public forum that takes students' research on local energy democracy issues to create a series of questions for local government officials and energy transformation agents to discuss in downtown Duluth every spring. And finally, our moderator, to my immediate right, Keesha Everett, is a natural convener and all-around social butterfly. Keesha Everett has found her way onto the Energy Transition Lab team. She is the Energy Storage Project Coordinator for the Energy Transition Lab. She has 15 years of project management experience working in Minneapolis with state and city health equity initiatives and performing nonprofit management. She is currently a student pursuing her degree in business management with a minor in human resource management. She proudly lists North Minneapolis as her hometown and firmly believes in the richness and potential of her community. As an engaged community resident, she participates as a board member of the Hawthorne Neighborhood Association, as well as PRG Incorporated, with a focus on creating possibilities for all communities and engaging residents from all neighborhoods. She's also convener of the North Minneapolis Clean Energy Engagement Project, an IAS research collaborative working with university and community partners to educate the community on energy systems and policy, explore opportunities in clean energy deployment, and to provide career track technical training in clean energy industries. Honors students, those of you who are engaged in the Nexus experience will be discussing at 5 or as soon as our presentation today is done in the Nolte Lounge as usual. And without further ado, I ask you to join me in welcoming our 3 guests today.
Thank you so much, Matt. So what I'm going to do, once I adjust this thing, is let you look at that image of global warming while I read you some notes I just wrote before I came in this room. What deserves protection? Copyright as a nexus of cultural and political ideas, the Age of Reason, the French Revolution, in relation to the church versus the rise of capitalism as the assertion of the middle classes versus royalty and the aristocracy. American copyright law is grounded in the same presumptions of entitlement as manifest destiny, anthropocentric and elitist, religious imprimaturs to capitalism. I am interested in the originalist definitions of copyright from the French Revolution and the sacred home, which is what eminent domain is supposed to be about. Now we have a narrative run amok. We have World War III battled with narratives, the prosperity doctrine. I am rich because God loves me, so I am good, blessed, and entitled. The present impeachment hearings counter-narrative. The common good and cultural aspirations take precedence over the narrative of divine dominion entitlement versus the Aramaic pastoral notion of husbandry, housekeeping the earth, rather than exploiting it. Not dominion, but responsibility. I groan when people say they love the King James Bible, when it was commissioned by a king and translated, written by sons of the aristocracy, taking liberties with the language to buttress their own power. What is art if it's more than a commodifiable object? So I hope I got somebody angry here. How many of you are actually law students? Nobody? All right. Okay, so in 2013, I felt stuck because I couldn't figure out how to stop global warming. This is from a project I did called Fish Story Memphis, and the way I visualized what was happening to North America was to the right we have storms and floods, to the left of the Mississippi we have forest loss, and the tundra, as we know now, is releasing enormous amounts of carbon. So then I came across some activists in New York who took the ideas of Peter von Tiesenhausen, an Alberta sculptor, and asked if those ideas could be applied to the Northeast. Peter's idea was to copyright his entire ranch. So when the natural gas people came by and wanted to put in their pipelines, he said, well, you can talk to me for about $1,000 a minute, but my ranch is copyrighted. And they went away. Now, the problem is it was never tested in the courts. So when you test copyright for art, there is one big glitch with work that's done in the natural environment, which is that site-specific work, which is a designation under copyright, can be moved. So my premise was, let's do some work that can't be moved. The activists showed me the maps of where they wanted to put in the pipelines, and I thought, let's designate the trees as critical nexi in a series of trigger points to arrest what is happening. To actually think of the pipeline corridors as musical lines and designate trees as tree notes in those lines that could then be copyrighted. So that's exactly what I did. I composed the music to do it, and it goes, so what you're looking at here, if I get this point, oh, there it is. Okay, so in the overture for this symphony, we painted trees that correspond to that musical measure, and each of these measures, there are now hundreds of them, are 1/3 mile, and this is one of the pieces that was sent in for copyright registration, which we got. So that was just one piece in a long corridor where we didn't have a chance to paint trees, but the reason it was so crucial was because this corridor is only about 100 feet from a nuclear center, and that's only about 30 miles from New York City. They put it in anyway. So now, wherever you see these blue dots, these are where there have been a measure of that symphony installed, which is actually the first movement of the symphony. And if you can imagine the biogeography, I'm still working on this GIS map, the musical lines would cross the biogeography, and that's what creates the symphony. So the symphony is broken down into 5 movements. These are the 5 movements. There was an overture, the first movement, which is when we painted the trees. The second movement is the legal process, so that's an ongoing issue. Oh no, that's not true. The second movement was at Newtown Creek, a Superfund site, and it was the premise that if we don't do something about fossil fuels, the entire continent will be a Superfund site. The third movement is the legal process, and the coda was specifically about the 2016 election because I knew it would be critical. So, just going to play you a little bit of one of those movements. So that notation was created by looking at the terrain where these measures were installed and then interpreting them musically into chordal structures. And this is people painting trees. More people painting trees. This is in Virginia, where we painted hundreds of trees. A detail. Another detail. How many of you are artists here? All right, so you'll get it that this is about painting. Well, we had a cease and desist, but they ignored us. And they did what's called a dark money maneuver on me. And they said, we're going to sue the hell out of you. And we're not going to pay attention to your cease and desist. And they did not. They cut down a lot of trees. And I thought, well, maybe that's the end. I've failed. I failed to stop them from cutting down the trees. And then I realized, no, that's the beginning, because that's the narrative. The narrative is the destruction and the resistance. So it's a Boolean problem. If, then, and, or, then, if, there's always another way to go forward. So in terms of the legal stuff, and since none of you are lawyers, I don't know if you care about this, but there is a relationship between eminent domain, copyright, the public good, and how we're going to get through the Anthropocene. And I'll just play you a little bit of the coda, which was in response to the 2016 election. Let me advance it just a little bit more for you.
The right to hold opinions without interference, and everyone shall have the right to freedom of expression. This right shall include freedom to seek, receive, and impart information and ideas of all kinds, regardless of frontiers, either orally, in writing, or in print, in the form of art, or through any other media of his choice.
So what I started doing, because I couldn't get a test case, I kept talking to lawyers, and especially after the election, people were really afraid of retaliation. And that's a very serious and very real risk. So I decided that, okay, I can't get a test case, but I can get these ideas moving forward. I can go back to what my first copyright lawyer told me, which was win this in the court of public opinion. I can expand the narrative. So I started doing installations around the world, and in some cases we had performances in the installations. This one was in South Korea. The immersive sound for the environment was bird song from one of the trees that had been in one of the measures. This is a little bit more detail of that photographic collage that you saw. And then in 2018, they went to Virginia. And we didn't even have a chance to put in a cease and desist. They cut down all the trees, hundreds of trees. And it was on the kind of shale dirt that they knew was going to cause a problem for people's aquifers, and it did. So we had a trial, a mock trial. And in the trial, we had a tree translator who listened to the music and then translated what the tree had to say about the destruction. That summer, I went to Inner Mongolia, and I went because I was fascinated by the horse tribes on the steppes there. And so they've now become part of my work going forward, because I see a connection between all the biogeographic elements that we are fragmenting and destroying, and the specific trees that might be local to some of our experiences. So in the work I'm doing right now, I'm taking those images from the Mongolian horse tribes that I shot, and they're interspersed with the grasses and the blue trees and praying hands, regardless of what I said about religion. And this would be an interior installation with an immersive sound. This would be an exterior installation that I'm working on now with some collaborators. And the reason this one is important is because it's on will be on Governor's Island next summer. And Governor's Island in New York City has become a loci for experimental research on adaptation to climate change. And there are a lot of artists on that island right now. There's a lot of tourist activity in the summer, so I anticipate a lot of traffic and a lot of discourse, and that's really at the heart of where we can go. We can still talk. The composer I'm working with has developed a composition with 24 acoustic basses that will be part of the installation that people will walk through, and they will be installed in the same configuration that I used to slow down heavy machinery and create the score for the original work. So all of this is predicated on my dissertation research, which was based in the physics of change, and for that work, I analyzed these 6 rules for how you look at any complex situation and can find a way out. And I don't think I'll read them because I hate it when people read their own slides. That's it. How many minutes was that? Oh, I tried to keep it to 15.
Thank you, Aviva. I think I'm feeling that the way I give my talk now, I want it to be in a dialogue with what you've done, so I may make some adjustments as I go. So I'm going to be talking about my community solar project, but I want to say that this the project itself is really to address the crisis of social equity and ecological justice simultaneously in this, in talking about property and community trust ownership. And also, of course, using solar energy to do this, but I first just want to say that I don't see solar energy itself as the answer. The technology itself has, problems with sourcing and life cycle, and it's not about, what I'm presenting is not about continuing to use electricity at the rate we do in the high energy society that we live in the ways we do. So this has to be combined with energy efficiency and many other things. But I'm going to focus here right now on the property aspect. So the Solar Commons project is the way I want to talk about the project is first to just talk about what trust ownership is, and then to, as a 21st century social and ecological tool, then I'll talk about the prototyping that we're doing to actually build and test this model of ownership. I'll talk about the public art, the public face that needs to be created for community trust ownership, and how we're using digital tools as well for monitoring, and then the scaling project that goes along with this. So first, I want to say that this, that trust ownership is, and this project in particular, should be seen in the light of several kinds of experiments that are being done right now with trust law. In particular, the work by Mary Woods at the University of Oregon Law School, her litigation strategy for treating air, the atmosphere as a public trust. There's those litigation suits that are going on called the Children's Trust suits in every state to hold governors responsible as trustees for stewardship of the air, the children themselves being the beneficiaries of the trust, so they own the equitable title. I'll talk about that. Also using public trust to protect water. Again, this use of this very ancient form of ownership that emerged before private property emerged in our common law tradition is what the solar commons should be understood to be part of. So, first of all, I think of the solar commons precursor as this, something having to do with this picture. Anybody know what that brown stuff is? Peat, yeah, it's peat. So that is this guy in Scotland in 2011 is exercising his right to gather peat there, his portion, his allotment of peat, and it's a right that he intergenerationally and others living in the area have been able to gather for hundreds of years because the land around there is private property. He doesn't own it. What he does own is equitable title to the energy resources in the land. So he and generations before him and generations to come are owners of the equitable title in the energy in the land, despite the dominant property regime, which could be private property in this case or public state property. So equitable title ownership or trust property ownership plays with the dominant regimes of ownership and has this potential to speak differently within those regimes. So again, I'll just say a word about the way in which trust ownership arose in the feudal era. You know, the dominant property regime of the feudal era was, of course, that after 1066 in the invasion of England, the king owned all the land, and you couldn't have villages and others as landowners as such. And so how could people have access then to wetlands, forests, and other things that they needed for subsistence? So the idea of trust ownership was a strategy. It was a legal strategy to get around the constraints of the dominant legal property system by creating a second kind of ownership, or splitting the title into a legal title and then an equitable title. So those who are not served by the dominant property regime. So this guy, again, is the owner of the equitable rights in this property. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. Hopefully that will become clear as you see it happening then in the solar domain. But really what the question was here was, for the legal team, was how do you basically use trust law to create a solar energy commons today within the dominant property regime that's actually thwarting equitable interests of electricity users? Okay, I'm reading my own slide. So, but yeah, so again, trust law is there for us to work around the constraints of a dominant property regime by splitting the ownership title. And so how do you go from allowing people to have a gathering right to solar energy, to exercise a gathering user right to solar energy in a dominant property regime which is where the utilities and the fossil fuel infrastructure is really divided between public regulatory regimes and private property, investor ownership regimes. So that's the question then for what kind of an equitable title can emerge from that. I want to say that my own history with this is I used to work as a fellow at the over 10 years ago at the Tamales Bay Institute, where we were working on strategies for creating institutions for a common sector, to grow a common sector, as opposed to a market sector or a state sector. So a common sector that could kind of play ball with the other sectors. And so this was part of that. I was living in Arizona and had this beautiful idea with some friends that, geez, we were putting a new light rail through Phoenix. And, you're going to need more electricity there. So you could build another huge gas plant or coal plant outside of town and bring that electricity in. Or you could put solar panels down that corridor, the right-of-way of that corridor, and you could own them as community trusts. And the trusts then would be serve the beneficiaries along that corridor who were going to be displaced. This was going through low-income areas, and you could then have a funding source through selling that electricity into the grid there that was going to be used immediately where the train was passing through, and that would go into a fund that would then belong to the beneficiaries, who would be programs serving low-income neighborhoods and things along that corridor. So you see that the green diagram there is just the basic diagram of how trust property ownership works. You split it between a legal owner, the trustee, and an equitable owner, the beneficiary. So that was the idea 10 years ago. I'm not going to go into 10 years of trying to stay in that right-of-way. Or then going to a public park, several public parks, or going to the city council and taking the project here and there. But years and years of beating the pavement on this. But the good news is that last year, finally in Tucson, still in the Arizona sun, we did interconnect. So we raised the money a long time ago, over 10 years ago, and we kept holding on to it until we could get the interconnection and get this done. We interconnected in Tucson, and the way the first Solar Commons prototype looks now, it's on the roof of a community center in one part of Tucson. And the energy savings that they have from solar on the roof that are metered, they deduct all the costs that they have, insurance, some O&M, operations maintenance, and things like that, very small, and they put the rest of it into the trust. And then that trust, the beneficiary of the trust, is across town in a very poor area of town, and it goes to the Tucson Urban League and programs that they run in that area of town. So that's the beneficiary, owner of the equitable title, and then the trustee is the host of the Solar Commons on their rooftop. So that's what it looks like. Technically, it was part of the Department of Energy Solar in Your Community challenge this last year, a finalist for that we were really happy about. The Rocky Mountain Institute did a financial analysis, and these materials are available. You can see we were super excited to know that they found a net present value in all scenarios we did, so in front of the meter, behind the meter, and we could talk more about the technical things involved here. Very exciting for us that we were able to get the model to work. Now we have about 4 projects we want to get going here in Minnesota. I want to talk a little bit about the beneficiary neighborhood, which is called the Garden District. So this is a high refugee area community. And as I said, it's the Tucson Urban League that's in that community that's delivering the benefits into the neighborhood. These are some blighted utility boxes that are going to be painted, because one thing about commons and solar commons is that the equitable title owner, like that guy who was collecting his peat, how does the community know that they're an owner? How do they know that? How will they know that? And that's where the community face and public art has to come in and has to be a part of this model. And so I want to tell you quickly what we're doing in Tucson on this first one. So we are so fortunate to have an alliance with Ellen Mcmahon, who's an environmental artist, and her students at the University of Arizona School of Art. One of the things they did is they went into the elementary school there and co-created with them, working with puzzles and stuff, co-created a game that could be a Solar Commons game with cards and trading. We can talk again more about that, but the idea of the game was to here's kind of the tiles in the game the artists created, really to teach principles of commoning and commons, teach about commonwealth versus commodity value. So there's earth commons, a sun, water, minerals, animals, plant, air that make up a nature commons. And then you connect that through the sun to the solar commons. The solar commons then has, on that side, the brown, it starts with gathering, or rather, I'm sorry, it starts from the sun to agreement. A neighborhood makes an agreement. Then there's the baskets or the technology, which is the gathering technology or the solar panels, and then electricity, and then trust, and then neighborhood coming out of that. So there's cards that allow kids to trade if they do something with, if they have animals or plants, and they have to give back water tiles, and there's a whole element to the game. The game, this is the elementary school, and they are going to allow us to paint kids playing the game on the side of the building. This is the artist that's going to be doing the picture. This is just one of his murals. You see him standing there with this kid. So he'll be painting the mural. We'll paint about 11 of those blighted electricity boxes with the game, and we'll use it in the neighborhood. We've made like several, 30 or more of the games that are going to go home with the kids and be played in the schools. And then the neighborhood will be distinguished also by this. So again, the face of the community face co-created with in that case in Tucson, the kids are really the messengers for the Solar Commons. They're kind of a Greta Thunberg inspiration for us that how to carry forward. But the public art for Solar Commons will look like every neighborhood that it's in. And the scaling for Solar Commons, which I see as a kind of the creation eventually of a commons option, kind of like the public option in healthcare. So a commons option in our energy grid. This Rocky Mountain Institute did an analysis of the scalability and found there to be capacity and for the funding sources as we had discussed them or in our model to 10 gigawatts. Now, there's about 60 gigawatts of solar in the United States right now, so 10 gigawatts could be a significant part of our grid and a significant kind of revenue for communities. Here's how we'd like to see it scaled. This should be a do-it-yourself kind of thing where a community could say, here's a need, could we fund this need in our community with the Solar Commons? And there would be legal templates based on the prototypes we've done. We have been working with Vermont Law School Energy Clinic to create legal templates for this work, so they'd be open source and usable. We'd have a do-it-yourself community guide. We're creating a trust protector institutional design. I'm working with computer science students who are creating the database and apps and things like that. So it's very easy and transparent to govern and to understand where the money's going, how the electricity turns into money, et cetera. And then the beneficiaries of the Solar Commons, there's some criteria. The Solar Commons is Creative Commons license on it, a form of copyright, so that there are certain principles about using a Solar Commons or doing a Solar Commons or using that name that will hopefully teach the things about Commonwealth versus commodity exchange values. So here's some other ideas of how we want to scale. There's the corporate social responsibility model. So we imagine that a big box store could host a solar commons on its roof, and that it could be a better neighborhood, a better neighbor, and with its savings from the solar, it could then that could be going into neighborhood programs. The one we have started in North Minneapolis here, we have agreements that we've started with the to create for the beneficiary of the solar commons there an internship with the for environmental journalism for the North High kids. That would be, they would learn also mentoring from the University of Minnesota to do reporting on environmental justice issues in their neighborhood, and then publish those in the local North News. So that's how we'd like to see those, that beneficiary program run, and have some have already designed that piece of it. We'd also like to see in Minnesota scaling through public right-of-way. So taking right-of-way, again, for community trust-owned solar. We have a relationship with the Main Street Project down in southern Minnesota, which is doing regenerative agriculture. It can fund training programs in regenerative agriculture down there. Up in northern Minnesota, where we also have gathering rights and other rights that tribal peoples have over several lands, where we're studying the kinds of lands that might be available for solar commoning there, and having test cases there. Lastly, I imagine that the solar commons could scale also like the Carnegie Libraries did. That is to say, a philanthropic individual who had a design for public libraries to give back from the wealth he had created a century ago, and communities could propose a library and come with an architect and a plan and land, and he would provide the money for that. I think solar commons could do something like that too. There's almost 3,000 Carnegie libraries that were built very quickly in the United States, relatively speaking, 100 years ago. We have 60 of them here in Minnesota. They're enduring. I think that we need to scale, of course, solar quickly and visibly in these ways, and that's one way I imagine it working. So here again, the idea of a commons option for solar energy as part of all of the work that's being done for understanding trust ownership and for beginning to experiment with community trust and public trust ownership for the crisis, the ecological crisis and social equity crisis that we are in. Thank you.
Hello. Okay, so we're gonna just have a seat over here and have a little conversation. I think that probably Matt had the biggest piece of giving the introductions. That was some significant amount of information there. Thank you, ladies. Thank you, thank you. Let me look at where we're at with time. And so in looking at the slides, when I kind of compare work and compare the art involved, the commonality of the work, I see the community engagement, giving access for the community to be involved, but kind of wanting to pivot into more legal, terms and legal barriers that you guys have faced within your work and within your projects. Can you speak more to kind of the legal barriers, especially with the Blue Trees Symphony? Is this model actually been in court? No. Okay, here, you got a microphone.
Is this working?
Yeah.
Okay, so the first problem was we couldn't just go around painting trees. We had to be invited by the landowners, by the private landowners, and they could not yet have been on condemned land. If we had painted trees on condemned land, they would have been arrested and thrown in jail. So that was the first barrier, where we painted. The second was that there's something called FERC, Federal Energy Regulatory Committee, that rubber stamps fossil fuel projects. They're all corporate execs who serve on the committee, even though it's a federal commission. And so every time we came up against a situation where we wanted to move forward and have a cease and desist, FERC basically said, nah, it's good, we're going to go. The third really huge problem, aside from the breakdown of copyright law about permanence and whether it could be moved and those kinds of issues, was that, especially in Virginia, once this new administration came in, they didn't even get permission before they cut down the trees. They just went in and cut down trees. There were people who were sitting in trees on their own land, trying to protect their land while they were in the process of litigation trying to protect it, and they had those trees surrounded by police that wouldn't even allow them to get food and water. And then they cut down the trees. So that's why I said that this is a narrative issue of public opinion, and it's a war, an environmental war, of whether we're going to survive ecocide.
Right. What about you, Catherine? What are your legal barriers in terms of your solar commons?
Well, I think first of all, when you're starting projects like these that are new and going to innovate something with property law, you need a team, you need a legal team, and then you need volunteers, lawyers who can volunteer their time, and working with that against property interests that have a lot more lawyers and to fight if there's a problem. So that's, I think that starting with that, just being able to have legal assistance has been super important in this, that a lot of volunteer lawyers have helped me work on the project. But resistance, I just think that when I was in the public right-of-way and trying to stay in the public right-of-way, which is really where I dreamed this would be, because I think that right-of-way in the common law tradition is something that actually evolved from the ancient commons. When people had agricultural commons in the feudal era, they had access to that common space. And when commons were enclosed, and people who lived in villages around those commons areas had to travel to their neighbors again, they needed a right of passage through those now enclosed lands. So the emergence of a right of way in our English legal system is I think a kind of residual kind of vestige of the old commons. I see it that way, and I think, but staying in the right of way, in public right of way, it was so onerous for going through the public process that had to be that had to happen in those cases. That was hard, and then working on private property with nonprofit rooftops and things like that, suddenly things went very, very quickly. So,
gotcha. Can I ask Catherine a question about this?
Yeah.
So I'm curious about the right-of-way issue in relation to eminent domain. Can you explain that intersection, specifically about the originalist definition, which the originalist Supreme Court justices have defended, about the intention of protecting the sacred home?
I don't know about the history of eminent domain. So that's really interesting. Obviously, I don't feel like I can say anything about that. I think that's of use, but I think historically there would be stories and then vestiges of something there in the law for leverage coming out of its original emergence in law. And I would highly recommend getting that material, having people research and work on that, because that research and those ideas that would come from it would be help us imagine how to use the law differently today.
Gotcha. I have 4 pages of questions here, but I do want to make sure we're being conversational and we have some dialogue and open it up to the floor for questions. If you all have questions. Is this loud enough?
This question is for Katherine. What is regenerative agriculture?
Well, so it goes beyond sustainable agriculture. So it's not just about sustaining the land, but it's actually using the land itself to have regenerative processes on it. So when you use chickens to fertilize the land, you're using the ecosystem of the land to and its regenerative potential. But you can think about regenerative, again, beyond sustainability, right? So regenerative processes, which I would like to see the Solar Commons be a part of showcasing, would be, again, exactly that nature itself has processes that need to be better used by us more cleverly in our urban planning and in our in urban and in rural areas for agriculture.
Okay. Yes.
First, I want to thank you both for your presentations and for your work, which, thank you. And I find your different experiences of the legal realm of your two projects and types so interesting. That just the fact that the commons, it was almost impossible to work through, but working with private landowners, yeah, that worked.
Right.
Whereas I didn't realize that you were actually working in tandem with private landowners, but through what I want to ask is, could you talk a little more about how the eminent domain regime worked, and what did you mean about the preserving the sacred home?
Eminent domain law, which is quite old, basically says we can take private land if it's in the public interest. That has been very narrowly defined as the economic interest, where Supreme Court justices like Clarence Thomas took exception was when corporations took private land for private profit. And I'm trying to remember the adjective he used. It wasn't abomination, but it was pretty close. And he wasn't the only conservative judge who felt that way. The reason he declared it as whatever it was, an abomination, was that the original definition of eminent domain is to protect the sacred home, which implies that a private landowner has dominion over their property. That is precisely what's being abrogated now across the country. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, so I guess this came before the Supreme Court, and was Thomas then in the minority? I think I remember this case.
Yeah, I don't remember the name of the case.
Some folks in New Hampshire or something.
Yeah,
Lost their
yeah, but the conservatives were overridden by the radical conservatives, I guess. I don't know what to call these guys. They aren't conservatives, at least not under the law, because there's nothing conservative about their opinions, their legal opinions.
And then, Katherine, how does that line up then with commons?
Exactly.
Does it?
Yes, that's right. No, that's a great question, Suzanne, because what's deep in eminent domain is this idea of a sacred home. But I think that commons, when we think about commons versus as a kind of property that where on the one hand it's not open access, it's not free for all, it's not, you know, like as they say, you know, it's not like free beer, it's more like free speech. So it has restrictions. And so the kind of property that's common property is going to have restrictions if you're going to manage something well for not just everybody, but again, the way commons management would be as local as possible, where people can be face to face. And I'm thinking about the work of Eleanor Ostrom, who won the Nobel Prize in 2009 for her, in economics, for her work on commons. So thinking of her principles, but it is I think that, you know, the difference between, you know, so understanding private property differently, so that collective ownership of property, what kind of ownership is that? And if people, in using the symphony, have collective rights on their property to this piece that is this collective piece, you're bringing together something that's not private and not public. You know, at the same time, you should be able to, you know, invoke your private property interests here and something bigger, but not public necessarily. It's not a public good. This is something even bigger than a public good. Maybe something, to go back to the sacred home you're talking about.
Yeah, I want to add a couple comments about this because I agree that it's a really important point. First of all, this has a lot to do with languaging, the distinction between common good and public good, because public good implies the economic leverage, and that's what's been abused. At COP15, which I attended, one of the groups I was working with was trying to press the point in terms of island nations of cultural aspirations, that you cannot legislate for climate change only economically. You must deal with the cultural aspirations. And when we tried to get a test case in Virginia, that was the basis for our suit, or would have been. The problem imminently is that the scale of urgency is so dramatic environmentally that we must rethink this language. And I think we're just at the beginning of that process. The idea of earth rights intersects very nicely, I think, with the sacred home that we all share and the spirit of art, if you presume that art is a cultural aspiration, which we have as much a right to as water.
Katherine, I have a question, and then we'll come up there. In terms of the solar commons and it kind of being a thing for low-income communities, what would you say is their say in the art installations and the benefits, the community benefits that come from this solar project?
Right. So, first of all, in prototyping solar commons should be, and we're trying to, as we write a community guide for it and prototype, be co-creators with neighborhoods, and so they have a say, so that we can model then how to do this together with neighborhoods. So, but actually, we want this to be a bottom-up not a development model, but a social tool, but a tool, an economic tool that's bottom up. So again, as I said, that a community itself could say, we have this need to fund a program. Could we fund it with the solar commons? And that would be the beginning of it. And then if you want to use the term solar commons, it has a Creative Commons license on it. And that means there are going to be certain terms about using it. And we want to make sure that those are broad enough so that a community, so we want public art to be part of it. And we want the community face and the equitable title to be imagined by the community together with artists. So it's something we want to evolve collaboratively in the community.
Hi there. So I'm actually asking Jennifer Gunn's question for her, but I'm also curious about this as well. Aviva, would you mind talking a bit more about what's happening on Governor's Island with artists in terms of the public art realm and, you know, what kind of impacts that's having?
Sure. Governor's Island was designated, I believe, by the mayor, certainly by the city government of New York, as a research area for modeling climate change adaptation. There have always been artists that used Governor's Island with various studios, but now they are really coming in strongly. There's a climate change museum. There's something called Swale, which a friend of mine, Mary Matlin, has initiated. Harvest Works is there. I'm an artist in residence at the new Lower Manhattan Cultural Center, which has just been restored. And there are about 15 of us that have a residency for over a year, 15 months, which is unheard of. And all of us are people concerned with social practice and environmental issues. This summer was fascinating because it had such a heavy traffic and such a sense of buzz about it. New York has always been kind of the center, well, mostly been the center of the art world globally. And now artists are on fire like the scientists about climate change. So it's just been overwhelming. I haven't been able to keep track of all the events. There's a huge experimental farm there and composting system. They've had amazing events. There have been discussions. I can't even imagine what next summer is going to be like, especially before the election. But I imagine it's going to be electric. I encourage you all to come to New York and come visit us there. Does that answer your question?
Barb, you gonna make me do this Oprah Winfrey thing?
Thank you both. I have a question, Katherine, about the RMI report about doing solar commons on tribal land. And if you can talk a little bit more about that and how it is compatible or maybe challenging given the legal complexity in native owned plants or land.
So we did hire a lawyer, actually a lawyer who worked on the Tucson Solar Commons to write a white paper on how the Solar Commons might have any particular benefit for tribes, focusing on Arizona and Minnesota tribes. And so that white paper I'll put up on our research website for everyone. But so, you know, tribal lands themselves are trust lands in federal Indian law. And so, you know, there would be different funding mechanisms that could be used for solar there. And I think that, you know, other than that, I don't think that I think then we're really talking about things that are more in sync, not so much with legalities, but with conceptual and indigenous cultural and sacred principles. And I think that using commons language, I think that, you know, gathering rights, commoning, and things like that, that's kind of the direction in which I've been starting to work with indigenous communities in northern Minnesota. Not so much on the status of their land that's given in the federal Indian law as trust land, but rather in their own categories.
And for you, are there any indigenous art things that you're doing in terms of the Blue Trees?
No, I wish there were. Relatively early in my career, I learned a lot about indigenous systems, and I started trying to adopt what I had learned. And I got two different messages that I thought about a lot. One was, don't co-opt. That's the most important one. The second was from a tribal leader when I was talking to him about restoring some land in Maine. He said, you know, you are the indigenous person on the land. And that was also a revelation to me. And in effect, we all are at this point. We are the indigenous people, but that's very distinct from tribal cultures. And I wish I were working with tribal people. I've certainly spoken to many of them, but no aspect of the Blue Trees Symphony so far has been with tribal people, although there is a tribal building on Governor's Island, so may not be the end of the story.
Could I add just one more thing, that one of the Solar Commons projects we have organizing in Duluth, which is on Lake Superior Community College land, and the beneficiary would be the American Indian Community Housing Organization there, and in particular, a program they run for teaching, teaching agriculture, urban agriculture, and other kinds of things to in their community. And there's a strong homeless community up in this area that they also serve. So with them, we are thinking of what artists, what Native artists could be part of the project, and we would have, again, the face of the equitable title owner would be, in that case, that would be co-created with a Native artist.
I just want to add one more thing, because obviously I'm well aware of what's going on with Standing Rock. I feel very hyper-vigilant about my relationship to what they're doing, because they're projecting a very clear and complex and complete position about their relationship to land. And although I support them in every way I can think of, I don't think they want that to be diluted. So if I can find a way at some point to work with them, I'll be honored beyond belief, as I'm honored, by the way, to be here at all. Thank you all. But right now, it's more a question of my watching what they're doing and perhaps parallel paths. We have a cultural tradition that is Western, and that is where I'm grounded.
I do want to note that when I found out about Aviva's work last week, that I immediately contacted Honor the Earths, a person from Honor the Earth, and asked them, could we start looking into whether or not this might be useful for those who are opposed to the Line 3 pipeline coming through. And so, I do hope that we're going to have some conversations up in Duluth about whether the Blue Trees projects is useful for that, that focus right now.
Gotcha. Any other questions?
Okay, so yikes. This goes back to what you were saying earlier, Aviva, about this being an issue, the problem being languaging, I think is how you put it. And I'm wondering whether, I know more of the backstory than Katherine gave all of us about how long it has taken for Solar Commons to come through, and I can't tell you how excited I am that it is finally working, and it is. That after all that, there is some success in this project, and it sounds like you've just hit, Aviva, you've hit so many walls with the projects through the Blue Trees and all that, and I'm wondering whether some of that might have to be with what we all understand, okay, we're going to get some money and then we're going to use it for projects for these people over here who don't have money. You know, that's something we understand, right? Whereas, as you point out, it's a bigger problem just to say, look, we've got to stop this. We should not do this pipeline. And what I'm getting at is, I think, I'm wondering, could you comment on the smaller concreteness of if that's the way to make a goal actually work, or I don't know where I'm going with that, but
Yeah, I don't get
here,
your question.
back to you.
Thank you. I guess what you're asking is, how do I go forward when there have been challenges?
Well, it's more, how do we wrap our collective mind around something that is a new solution? But the solution Katherine gives us is a solution that we've known for thousands of years. There are inequities. Let's figure out a way to gather resources to help people who are in need.
Okay, I think I get your question. I think your question is, how do we change and adapt fast enough to survive, right?
Well, I mean, that is it, yeah. So, yeah.
Well, a couple things about that. First of all, art can cut through time in ways that nothing else can. And I am a committed artist, and I believe that. I've given my whole life to that, and I intend to give the rest of my life to that. So that's one answer. Politics can change in a heartbeat. We saw that in 2016. I don't know what we're going to see in 2020. I find it very nerve-wracking. But it is very clear to me, first of all, that we are in World War III. We're having just as much collateral damage as we had in any of the previous wars. But it's being fought very differently. And I do think it's being fought on the basis of narrative. I think that's being projected through all kinds of things, social media, films, whatever. The significant part of that, for me as an artist, is this idea of changing culture through narrative comes from artists. It comes from Black artists, it comes from feminist artists, it comes from queer artists. So we know how to do this. And I keep looking in my own work for how can I clarify the most compelling story that can reach across as much of the globe as possible. And that's all I can do. I'm here.
I'd like to say something about that too. So, you know, when I think about the usefulness of law in the project that I'm doing, I think about it as part of the project of building an institution, as I said, for a common sector. So not only is it a tool to take resources from here and make sure they go over there, but it also is to build an institution. That means to build something that is durable and can be protected, and law can help us do that. But in some sense, it's almost the antithesis of what, if I understand what you were saying about art, that art is not about necessarily an institution or building an institution. On the other hand, I want to say that when I very successfully could get the technical pieces right with the legal team so that we could create something that could become an institution, it was like a tree falling in the forest with no one hearing it. A technical solution that has potential and that works, if nobody cares about it, if nobody knows about it, if it's not embedded in the right narrative for how it can grow, is meaningless, almost. So the legal work, I would say, is, and maybe this is related to the kind of legal work that goes into the copyrights law, but the legal work is so intense, and you need such brilliant technical thinkers in law to help you do something new like that. At the same time, if we don't have an alliance with artists that communicate what we're trying to do and help us, help people care about it the way we do it, that we feel the passion to go for 10 years until we get it right, that has to be translated. So
We also in the United States have this historical background of breaking treaties and massacring people and, just out and out lying about, things. So when it comes to copyright on, the art of trees on somebody else's land, like how do we move that movement to make it stick? So I guess I hadn't watched the documentary all the way through to know that they had actually bulldozed these trees down, just like you're crazy and we're going to do what we want to do anyway, which is the history of the United States.
Well, just on the topic of institutions, in 1999, I helped initiate an institution. It's an eco art listserv that's by invitation only, but it's international. There are about 200 of us. And we debate all the time what is the best way to go forward. And I must spend 70% of my time on that dialogue complaining, saying, this is too hard, I can't do it, all these people are horrible, I'm innocent. And then I figure out what to do next. And partly how I figure out how to do something next is because of the feedback I get from the other people. And as far as this question of the lone researcher trying to figure out the technical, I know how hard it is with the legal process, but that's true of GIS also. The issue, and I'm utterly thrilled that you're talking about us maybe trying to find some way to go forward. The issue is, how do we create the adequate teams to override the lies and the denial? And this is not an easy task. But one reason I'm so pleased to be here with you all is because this is where we can talk about how to do that. You guys will do that. But we need to talk about how we're going to do that.
I think we have time for one more question, and then we're going to... Oh, okay.
Since Keesha is questioning the very basis of law, and as a lawyer, I appreciate that because I basically question it as well. I'm really wondering about the role of art in activism like Sunrise and Extinction Rebellion, and I really see some very compelling images and storytelling coming through that really youth-led movement. So, I think both of you, I think it's fair for me to say you might not be in the youth-led movement, but you have experience.
What do you mean?
I'm not. They're like 20, and they go into Dianne Feinstein's office.
Details.
And they have the mic, and they have these banners, and it's, Anyway, I'm interested in that sudden shift you referred to, and that sort of political cultural shift, and how does law and art and that cultural change?
Oh, you want an answer standing on one foot?
Yeah, exactly.
I went on the climate march, what was it, about a month or two ago? That was the Children's March in New York City. It was a really fascinating experience because the average age was 15, I'd say. And there were so many of them. And there were so few of people like me with gray hair. There were a few. They ignored us for the most part. And it was very, very moving for me because I felt like the torch has been passed. I'm doing something a little different. I may or may not go on Extinction Rebellion events or other events,
But that's not my task now. I have a task in my work, in my project, in the collaborations that are still developing. The composer I'm working with, Eve Beglarian, is developing her music or sound based on carbon emissions around the world. There are all kinds of ideas for how to go forward. I don't know if I've answered your question.
I just want to say as an elder also that I feel like my task is different. Like I can sit with the trouble of law and the legal team a little bit more patiently than I ever could have if I were younger. And, so that will be something I'll do so that I can create something enduring in that way that's a tool. But I'll just try to build it, and the team will try to build it so that it has connectability to all of these movements and all of these ways of presenting a community face and a community need, and that law itself could never express and could never carry itself in any way.
Just to quickly follow up, because what you really asked me was, how does law help? And law is a set of rules. And what I'm most interested in is how do we develop the kinds of complex adaptive models that can create that sudden change. And that's about rules.
Okay, one more. Preferably on the front row. No, I'm just joking. Right.
I'm fascinated by the Solar Commons idea, and the Carnegie Library example helped me understand it, I think, a little bit better. It makes sense to me that if you had solar technology, once capitalized and managed properly, could function in perpetuity to serve a certain set of beneficiaries. The part I don't understand is without ownership of land, how does it work in perpetuity? In other words, if this is just situated on the roof of a nonprofit that has some sort of other mission, what happens when the nonprofit decides it doesn't want a solar array on its roof anymore?
Yeah, so, trust law has you create a trust agreement, and the trust agreement has all the rules that are going to apply. The solar technology actually gives me the temporality of the community-based, funding. And so, what is it? It's however well we build these solar panels, will it be to 30 years, 35, 40? Not in perpetuity. So it's some of the trust things we've talked about here that, the enduring Turbury Commons or something is, what I think that Solar Commons can do is connect to commons that should be in perpetuity: air, water, regenerative, building things, and that's the way it'll do it. But it only has its technology-given temporality, and that's in the rules that are in the trust agreement itself, which has how to decommission, how to pay for that, and all of those kind of technical things.
But the initial investment could be transferred somewhere else upon
I
expiration
see
of the technology.
Right, yes, yes. So using the Carnegie model, basically you would just have, hello, big funder, get a hold of me through University of Minnesota. So that, yes, we'll build the tools so that some very big funders could put that
Okay. So we are at the end of our series here, or our talk. Last thoughts around adding hip hop or jazz to your symphony in the Blue Trees. And last thoughts with you, Karen, around energy storage with your solar.
Okay. Put me in touch with the musicians and we'll see what we can do.
Energy storage, the solar commons model, it works, it can work behind the meter in some places. It all depends on net metering. And again, I didn't want to get too technical here, but there are places like where I live in northern Minnesota Power Territory, where it won't work at all unless you have storage. So you can't even think about doing a solar commons there without storage. And the one we are planning in Duluth, the first one, will have storage. It has to, or would make no money. And, that's another interesting thing to compare. Down here in Minneapolis, you could have a solar commons working and bringing in a nice income for its fund and its beneficiary, but not under the rules up in Minnesota. And so once you start using storage and you start holding that electricity in a marketplace that where the price goes up and more than the utility is giving you for it, for your net metered solar, you hold it until it's then, you let it go, and then they have to pay more, and that more goes back into the community. So yes, we need, for solar commons to work, we need net metering, and we need, we need real value of solar. We need the true value of solar to be incorporated into the model, not what we have up in northern Minnesota with Minnesota Power right now. But we can work around that with storage.
Okay. Thank you, ladies. Thank you, audience. You have been so kind. Am I passing this on to Matt? Or are we done? Okay. Thank you.